Hi guys, I love you. And because I love you, I'm saving you from a boring lecture when you're kids so you guys can possibly see it later on YouTube. Um, because you guys and possibly some viewers were born long after the Cold War officially ended in 1991, I thought I would give you a very brief history lesson and then explain how you will most likely see the start or the restart of the Cold War in your lifetimes. Um, in the 80s, when I was a kid, I asked my dad what the Cold War meant. And he said, a Cold War is when we are at war with another country without directly fighting them. Otherwise, that would be a hot war. And so when I asked him, when did the Cold War start? He said, after World War II. But the Cold War really started when the Soviets tested their first atomic bomb on August 29th, 1949, which meant that the US was no longer the only atomic superpower and that an arms race had begun. While there was a real threat of nuclear war between the USSR and the US, especially during the Cuban Missile Crisis, mutual mass destruction tends to keep rational actors from setting the world on fire. Sorry, I realize I need to speak up louder in these videos. So instead of a direct war, a Cold War began. And not only was there an arms race that cost the US over $13 trillion in 4 decades, it included a technological arms race, or a technological race that brought us to the moon. It gave us advancements in cellular technology, computers, aerospace, robots, robotics, just crazy advancements otherwise. However, it also brought hundreds of thousands of lives lost of American soldiers in the Korean War and Vietnam War, which was to combat the Soviets and to fight the spread of communism. And so, as for us, Vietnam War, just like the Vietnam War was for us, we also had a proxy war in Afghanistan to fight the Soviets. And similar to Vietnam, where there were millions of civilian lives lost, Afghan civilians suffered massive losses as well. So there's some heavy tolls paid by the Cold War that I don't think we fully acknowledge, and some benefits too. You could argue that the Cold War never really stopped, but was put on hold while the USSR melted into what is now the Russian Federation. And Syria would be a good example of that, of another proxy war, complete with the US repeating the same mistakes. We propped up and funded Osama bin Laden to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, only for him to be our enemy later. And what are we doing? We're doing the same thing with Operation Timber Sycamore to fund terrorists, ISIS-associated terrorists in Syria, just so we can fight Assad and his proxy Russian overlords. Fun. But ever since the accidental president was elected, an opportunity to restart the Cold War has been seized. And all this Russian collusion, which there's no evidence for, has been the main reason. It's been the main excuse. and the corporate mouthpieces in the media who speak on behalf of the military-industrial complex have been red baiting for over a year now with minimal effect. However, the push to blame Russia for Trump's election, or should I say Hillary's loss, they've even gone so far as to calling Russian interference an act of war. And that's nothing new, it's propaganda. You know, every time Rachel Maddow, or Russia Maddow as she's called now, and other so-called journalists at MSNBC and CNN and Fox News and the Washington Post, every time they mention Russia, it's pure propaganda. And I can prove it. So, I read 1,000-page specifications for a living, so I know how to sift through boring-ass documents like the 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, which you can download as a PDF. So, in the 2018 NDAA, an extension of the Patriot Act, really, Congress passed in December 12, 2017, for this year's NDAA, and under sections 1239A, 1637, 1638, and 1641, the State Department, along with the military and intelligence agency department heads, are authorized to use propaganda on U.S. citizens to combat malign influence from the Russian Federation. Yep. And if you know who Alex Jones is, he was removed from the internet and social media sites for violating abuse rights, coincidentally all on the same day. And according to section 1636, part 3, E and F, to counter the influence, deception, and propaganda activities of key malign actors, including in cyberspace, development of guidance for and promotion of the capability of the Department of Defense to liaison with the private sector, including social media, on matters relating to the influence of malign actors. To me, that sounds exactly like what happened to Alex Jones, and what could potentially happen to anyone else labeled a malign actor. I had to read section 1239A, part 2D, in order to find out that the Global Engagement Center, to carry out its purpose to lead, synchronize, and coordinate efforts to recognize, understand, expose, and counter propaganda and disinformation efforts by the Russian Federation, other foreign governments, and non-state actors. Which made me ask, what the fuck is the Global Engagement Center? So it turns out that the 2016 NDAA authorized the creation of the Global Engagement Center, which has an annual budget of $60 million, and the sole purpose of which is to disseminate propaganda on U.S. and European citizens. So, ever since 1991, when the Cold War officially ended, military spending greatly decreased throughout the 90s. But the neocons who work for the military-industrial complex, they couldn't let the profit take a hit anymore. So they developed the Project for a New American Century. And what do you know? 9/11 happens. And we had a whole new war on terror to fight. And don't forget about the totally legit war in Iraq. That there was weapons of mass destruction, absolutely. Even Robert Mueller was pushing for that. And what do? We go in there, kill a bunch of innocent people, get a bunch of American soldiers killed, all for what? Yeah, just to make the military industrial complex happy again, make the bankers happy again, neocons, they're all super happy. Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Raytheon, they're each now getting 25 to 30 billion dollars a year to develop weapons of war. For what? To keep the whole thing going? And if we don't get into a war with Iran soon, the Cold War will go into full swing. I mean, there's just too much money at stake. There's trillions of dollars at stake over the next decade, if we get into another Cold War. And my only fear is that U.S. citizens will lose more of their rights, and that tech and social media companies will bend over for the Pentagon, out of fear that they'll be broken up for playing Monopoly, or, shit, you just don't fuck with intelligence agencies like the CIA and NSA when they ask you to comply. So, it's all very disturbing, and I hope it changes in your guys' lifetime, or possibly before you get a chance to see this video. I'll put the link to the 2018 NDAA in the description. Good night, good luck. I love you guys, and maybe you'll see this when I'm gone. Clean your room.